Hi, welcome everyone to another week of spiritual reflections. And the topic today is going to be Cezire Derneği, or in English, Cezire Association. I've got two wonderful guests today, both co-founders of Cezire Association. I have Mustafa Qureshi, a Turkish Cypriot historian and researcher, and also journalist Ertan Karpazlı, who's co-founder of Cezire Association. And welcome, guys, to the show.
Thanks for having us. Pleasure to be on.
Great. We've had people have seen us a lot lately, but it's been good to see what Cezire Association is, so everyone has like an insight to what you do. And so the first question will go to Mustafa, because I know Mustafa, you've got a busy schedule today. And so yeah, can you just give us a brief? What is Cezire Derneği or Cezire Association? Can you explain to our viewers, please?
Yes, of course. So yeah, as you rightly said, it's an association which myself and my friend Ertan Karpazlı founded in 2008. It was originally called Cyprus Türk Mirasına Hizmet Derneği, which is a mouthful, and that translates roughly into the Cyprus Turkish Protection of Heritage Association, something along those lines. But it got to a point where no one could remember the name. So we decided to change the name to something which would be easier to say, but at the same time, nothing that would be like your typical derneği in Cyprus, Cyprus Turkish always. So we gave it a lot of thought, and at the end we felt that Cezire Association or Cezire Derneği would be most appropriate, and that's simply because Cezire means island, ada, and it was used commonly in Ottoman sources. And they would say Cezire Cyprus or Cyprus Ceziresi to refer to our beautiful island. So we thought it was a nice way, and it also allows for many people to actually ask, what's Cezire mean? And it allows for a nice conversation to build up. Why we found it? Because we both are passionate about our history, our culture, our identity. And I feel, well, from my knowledge, Cezire Association is the only dernek, be it in Cyprus or in the Turkish Cypriot diaspora, which focuses on the history and heritage of Islam in Cyprus and that of the Turkish Cypriots. So it spans a 1400-year history, which is different from most historical associations which focus on the mid-20th century and the conflict and the friction between the two major communities in Cyprus leading up to 1974. So what we feel is we are not a lobbyist organization. We're not focusing on the conflict era either. It's important as well. We're not trying to degrade it in any way, but we feel that there's more than enough of that. And because we're passionate about our culture, which isn't just guns and fighting and you know, you may be fooled by when you go to Cyprus with all the people wearing camouflage and Rambo clothing, but there is a lot more to our culture, and we just want to give it. You know, you could be left wing or right wing, and that's fine. We're not. We have members with diverse political opinions. That's not a problem at all. I mean, if you're right wing and you're waving a flag around, and you're not acting in a way which actually is befitting for someone from your culture, then what does that flag symbolize? It's just, you're just wasting your time. Or if you're a left winger and you want to unite with the South, that's up to you. But then some people will then deny their Turkishness or or deny their Islamic heritage to fit a political narrative, and I feel that's wrong. That's really bad. Now, if you accept and know your heritage, and then you still decide to take on this political ideology, then that's fine. Then you can have a multicultural society. But if you're trying to, if people are trying to propagate that we all have to be one to live in peace, then that seems problematic to me. But other than the kind of the politics of it all, I feel that I've gone on a bit of a tangent there. It's just something we feel really passionate about, and we feel that there's a lack of research and propagation for this particular area. And those that are propagating this are people from the Occident, i.e. the West, predominantly English historians, but also in the last 5 to 10 years, there's been a rise in Greek Cypriots, which have taken interest in the Ottoman era. And we feel that it would be most appropriate for us, for our community, to research our own history and give the narrative the importance that it deserves, a 1400-year history.
Absolutely. And there's no connection between the channel Al Jazeera, because that's what people ask me as well.
Yeah, we get that asked a lot as well. No connection, no affiliation, no communication with Al Jazeera. That's Al Jazeera with a J and double E. No affiliation. The word came to our language. Its source is from Arabic, and it has the same meaning as island. But our association is purely non-political, not affiliated to any movement at all. We want to promote our history and culture for what it actually is, and I will use Western and Eastern sources to just show what it is.
Thank you, Mustafa. I knew it wasn't, but just for our viewers, just in case they got confused with the title. Going to Ertan now. Ertan, great to see you back on the show. What is the aim?
Great to be here.
Thank you. What is the aim of Cezire Derneği Association, and why was it created? I know that Mustafa's given us a bit of a brief explanation, but can you say a few things in your own words?
Well, really, it's just to promote, preserve, protect, even revive, perhaps, Turkish Cypriot cultural identity. As we all know, we've been exposed to, as a people, a lot over the past century. Nowadays, the majority of Turkish Cypriots, we reckon probably about 70% even, live outside of Cyprus. And naturally, with that development in our history, we now have second, third, even fourth generation Turkish Cypriots who have been born and raised outside of Cyprus. Forget about them speaking Turkish. Even their parents can barely speak Turkish. Even their grandparents, perhaps, are struggling to speak Turkish. They don't have much of a connection with Cyprus. I'm personally of that generation of, I'm a second generation myself. I'm of that generation where I can look back on my childhood and, I can remember when I was visiting Cyprus in the 90s as a child, seeing with my grandparents and my great-grandparents remnants of what was left of traditional Turkish Cypriot culture. I've been very fortunate in that case. Anyone who's roughly my age who's been to Cyprus in the 90s has been very fortunate to see with our own eyes, actually, Turkish Cypriots who were born during the time of the Ottoman Empire. We've seen these people with our own eyes. But we are the last generation to ever lay eyes upon Turkish Cypriots who were born of that era. Young Turkish Cypriots now, perhaps those who are under the age of 20, are not so fortunate. And their exposure to our history, if just left to themselves, is going to be very different to our exposure or to the exposure of those before us. And it is getting to a point now where we cannot identify what our culture is. Now, I'm not against the evolution of culture. That's a very normal thing. Of course, if we're born and raised in Britain or Australia or wherever we may be, we will pick up certain habits and certain things that, will change, our day-to-day lives. And this isn't necessarily a bad thing. For example, in Cyprus, we don't eat curry in Cyprus. That's something I discovered here. Being around
Pakistan, they do now.
They do now. That's a nice evolution. That's a nice addition to our culture and to our cuisine. And that's the thing, though. Curry, I love curry, but curry is always going to be, for me, someone else's culture that I love, that I've adopted in my personal life. Turkish Cypriot cuisine is mulahia, fırında makarna, bulli patates. This is our cuisine. You understand? And I actually prefer the curry over bulli patates. But end of the day, the bulli patates is my culture. The curry is not my culture. The curry is my preference, but not my culture, you see. So what Cezire Derneği is really trying to do is help Turkish Cypriots set the boundaries really of what their culture is, and by doing so, we are at the same time educating people about their culture, letting them pick and choose really from what their culture actually is, rather than just like blindly following what other people are doing around them. And from there, we can perhaps preserve and even revive some lost elements of our culture, or elements of our culture that are about to be lost in the next generation or two. Just to really kind of extend and prolong our existence as a people and as a community, and maintain some kind of conscious Turkish Cypriot identity. So I think in a nutshell, that's what Cezire Derneği's aims and objectives are.
Very good points, very valid points as well you made. Yes, we are, unfortunately, people like me, Ertan, Mustafa, we are the last probably of Turkish Cypriots who have met people that were born in that last era of the Ottoman Empire, or the early beginnings of the British colonial powers. And we are losing those people, unfortunately. And going with them is not only the people, but we're also losing a lot of oral history that they had, and some of the stuff they knew about their own culture. Do you guys feel that we're losing more than we're actually preserving? It's not one of my questions, but it's just a point.
Yeah,
Do you feel
absolutely. We're living in an age where discoveries in science and new discoveries in kind of historical evidence are being found, and unfortunately, as you rightly have said, because we in general haven't been able to preserve much of our identity, our interpretation of that information can often be misinterpreted, misunderstood, or, as I mentioned earlier, in which there are scholars from the Occident who are writing our history for us with their own bias, and as such, we are translating these works into Turkish because we lack the connection with traditional sources. One main example of this, we mentioned this in our lecture that we did with you, Hussein Hoja, in February, regarding the precursors of the Turks in Cyprus, where I mentioned about where 1400 years ago, companions of our beloved Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, voyaged to Cyprus. These companions, these people of high morals, who ventured to Cyprus not for a holiday, they struggled, they were martyred to spread the word of Islam, to spread peace and God's word and God's law to Cyprus. We are honored by the presence of these people, and because of 100 years old sources which have repeatedly called these companions pirates and raiders, and there's often this kind of logic where if you repeat something enough, it becomes accepted as a truth. And you see now that there are, unfortunately, in Cyprus, a lack of historians who can actually read in Ottoman or have access to Arabic sources. And unfortunately, they are translating these works into Arap akıncıları, Arap korsanları. And by using this terminology already, whatever you explain after that, the first impression of those esteemed companions is that of pirates. And our idea of pirates may be Pirates of the Caribbean or whatever else you may see in the media. Further to that, I mentioned scientific discoveries, and it's become quite trendy in our community in particular to take a DNA test. Now, it's fun. I've done it myself. However, if you haven't done your research prior to doing this test, or understanding the categorization that the company uses, then your understanding of your ancestry again will be wrong. So I'll give you an example. In 1923, the Ottoman Empire is over and the Turkish Republic has been established. At the time, it was the only country in the world, independent Turkish country in the world. and therefore they took the name as Turkey. It was a traditional name that was also referred to them, and it was a land for Turks, and many refugees went to those lands as well. Over time, however, what's referred to as dış Türkleri, the Turks from outside of these borders, were presented with a problem, especially the newly founded republics, which the second one to be independent and still there is the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus, which was established in 1983. So the people within Turkey, even if they weren't ethnic Turks, Kurds, Laz, Circassians, and so on, you're Kurdish, but you're also Turkish. But then ethnic Turks from outside of Turkey, they're not Turkish enough. They're Cypriot. Or Turk from Kirkuk is an Iraqi. Or Turk from Azerbaijan is Azeri, even though that's the name of the region, not an ethnic title.
Not the ethnicity.
Not the ethnicity. And this isn't a nationalist rant, which I'm saying here. So because there's a skewed idea that because Anatolia has taken the name of Turkey, therefore you can only be a Turk by being from Turkey, we are starting to lose our identity, and we're trying to find a new one, which after 1983 or after 74, where we started pushing, we're Turkish Cypriot as a separate identity. Right? We are Turkish Cypriot as much as the Turks from Anatolia are Turkish Anatolian. They do not have the patent of Turkishness. They are not more Turkish than us, and we are not more Turkish than them. Nor is the Azerbaijani more Turkish than the Anatolian. It varies. They have the Anatolian flavor of Turkishness, and we have a Cypriot flavor of Turkishness. Now, coming back to the point regarding these companies and their DNA sources, they categorize according to region and also the name of countries which dominate those regions.
Yeah.
So with Ancestry.com, they have Turkey and Caucasus. That's a huge area. That's the whole of Anatolia and the Caucasus. So a Chechen, you'd have a Chechen in that group, as well as someone from Izmir, as well as someone from Diyarbakir. And even northern Syria is part of that categorization. If you have DNA which says Turkey and Caucasus, it means that you have what they call haplogroups, which is a mutation in your DNA, which is prevalent for that region. Now, a Greek from Anatolia, and there are many Greeks from Anatolia,
of course,
and there are many Armenians as well. And I don't think they will take kindly to being called Turks because of the passport which they hold. They would have DNA and a haplogroup which would be in the category of Turkey Caucasus, and it would be different from the haplogroup of the Greeks of current day the Hellenic Republic. I remember I was discussing with one individual who had a haplogroup from the category of Greece and Balkans, and they assumed that because it's called Greece in this categorization, therefore they must have Greek ancestry. That is a possibility. That is a possibility. However, it just means that your ancestor had a haplogroup which is more prevalent, not exclusive, to that area. And considering that today you belong to a people of the Muslim civilization and you're Turkish Cypriot, it's more than likely that you would be from a Muslim community of the Balkans. Remember, before the end of the Ottoman Empire, 50% of the Balkans, including Greece, was Muslim, predominantly Turkish, but also Albanians and also Bosniaks. And you have various Gypsy communities who are Muslim there as well, and so on. So the most likely indication would be that you had a Muslim forefather from that area who, to avoid the massacres against the Muslim community, fled from there and either went to Anatolia or Cyprus and so on. So I've met people from Cyprus who have the surname Girit Litoldu, for example. And that would be that they are the sons of Cretians. The point I'm trying to get at is if you haven't done your research beforehand, seeing Greece and Balkans would make you think that you're from Greece and you're Greek, right? Now, Cyprus in this categorization is within the Middle East. So I've seen members of our community who would see Middle East and say, oh, great, I'm Arab. you may well have Arab in you. In fact, there was a large number of Arabs which went to Cyprus, intermarried, and became Turkish Cypriot in the present day. However, you could be a homegrown Cypriot from the first settlers that came in 1571, and you have that mutation for that area. That is the most likely response. The other thing that the people are arguing is that Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots have very similar DNA, and which is more similar than that of Anatolians and Greeks from Greece. Now, the Greeks from Cyprus are ethnically, and by that, my definition of that is by cultural and linguistic association, they are Greeks, and I'm not trying to take that away from them. However, racially, they are very much different because the haplogroup is different for Greece from that of Cyprus. The original inhabitants of Cyprus, the forefathers of the Greek Cypriots, which they called Etio-Cypriots, originated from Anatolia and also the Levantine coastline. And that was supplemented by Ugaric and Phoenicians, which are from present-day Lebanon. The Turkish Cypriots, if you recall, I mentioned that we have Arab additions to our blood. Many of the Arabs that came over from were Egypt and Lebanon and Jordan and Palestine. So it's no wonder that we will have similarities with the Greek Cypriots. Am I trying to negate that there was intermarriages? Not at all. There was intermarriages. However, the scholar Ronald Jennings said that the intermarriages were minimal in comparison to other areas of the Ottoman Empire. So let's put it this way: if you have 100 people, I'm just saying off the top of my head, the bulk of that 100 people would be Turks from Anatolia and Aleppo and those kind of regions, Turkmen, Yörük people, and they were supplemented by Arabs from Egypt, the Levant, and various other communities of Christian origin, for example, people of Italian stock, and intermarriages between Greek Cypriots. This doesn't make us any less Turkish, because the Anatolians have a high level of intermarriage with Armenians and Greeks. In fact, Istanbul, Constantinopolis, Izmir, Smyrna, Edirne, Adrianopolis, Trabzon, Trebizond, Anatolia, Anadolu is a Greek word. Küçük Asya, Asia Minor, Migro Asya. These are all Greek names. Just because they divided those people, not long before our one, from the 1920s, we divided from, 1963, officially in 1974. So that pretty much we spent the same time, Turks and Greeks shared the same land, the same as the Anatolians did, as that of the Cypriots. So we need to keep that in mind. And I'll be frank with you, even if my ancestry was to say I was 100% Italian, that wouldn't change anything. That wouldn't change anything, because that's a racial categorization, not ethnic. My culture and how I feel to be, and the way that I was raised, was as a Turkish Cypriot.
Yeah.
So that's why knowledge is important. I mean, if you don't know that, you don't know the categorization, you will start believing and passing on to your children that you have this kind of romanticized idea of having some kind of exotic blood or something else. And often I feel that this is stemmed from, and I'm just going to wrap up here, from, and I'm going to go into this further after, where we suffer from not just Cypriots, but many others who are under colonialist rule, from a post-colonial mindset. We are the children of people who were raised by colonial powers, in this case Britain. So we have in our mindset, the post-colonial mindset indicates that people have they have a identity crisis. Anything that is deemed as Turkish or Arab or Islamic or anything belonging to the Orient is deemed to be lower in level, less advanced. Anything from the Occident is something to be praiseworthy. So having that 1% Italian is such is an excuse to say, right, well, actually, I'm from the Italians. I have a claim to be from these people. Or the fact that the Republic of Cyprus is in the European Union. Oh, great, we're European now. You're not. That's a political affiliation. Cyprus is geographically, culturally, and its people's DNA are rooted within the Middle East. And we need to be proud of that.
Thank you, Mustafa. Can I just go through some of the questions? Got a few viewers, and Okcan Yıldırım Türk, hope I haven't pronounced that wrong, says, hello, you mentioned the Western and Greek Cypriot scholars.
Yes.
But there are, of course, Turkish Cypriot historians studying Ottoman history of Cyprus. What do you think about them? Are you in contact with them? That's one question. Also, Ergun Karpazlı, which is Ertan's father, says, Maşallah Londra'daki gençlerimize yıllarca yılmadan çalıştılar, kültürlerini uyutmadılar. Thank you. But Levent Yıldız says, I disagree, Quraysh Abi. And then I asked why, and she said, Turkish Cypriot's genetic profile is native Cypriot, Greek, Anatolian, Turkish settlers, with sometimes Sudanese, but not always the case. Every other ethnicity, like Italian or Balkan ancestry in Turkish Cypriots, is negligible. What do you say about
that? First of all, it's great that we're having this conversation. I'm so happy, and thank you, Levent, Levent Bey, for sharing your opinion, and I respect that. I will start in order of the questions.
Thank you.
I think the first one was by Okcan Bey. Western and Greek Cypriot scholars, but there are, of course, Turkish Cypriot historians studying Ottoman history of Cyprus. What do you think? Okay. Yes. Okay. The traditional historians of the Ottoman era, I respect and I recommend that people read their books. So one would be Halit Fedai. Halit Fedai is a picture. He passed away not too long ago. He is a serious Ottoman historian. He has translated Divan poetry, and Divan poetry is very advanced. First of all, the writing, the font in which they write is in what they call Rika. It's not in the same font that is simple as in what you'd read in newspapers in the time. Secondly, the language that they use, Lisani Osmani, as opposed to Lisani Turki. Lisani Turki is the Turkish that we speak today. So this understanding of when you say Osmanlıca, you need to define what you mean by that. The elite spoke, they spoke Turkish, and predominantly the grammar was still very much Turkish as well. But they would add a lot of Farsi, Persian words, and Arabic words as well. This was to show their level of education. This was to spice up and put a bit of flavor into our languages. And they were able to use prose and various styles of writing from these three Islamic languages, which dominated the Muslim world, into beautiful poetry. And I would advise anyone interested in the subject to look into the poetry of Mufti Hilmi Efendi, and even the Mevlevi Tariqa in Cyprus has amazing divans. Absolutely, you just get lost in the poetry that they write. So Halit Fedai, if you're interested in the subject, very serious historian. I would highly recommend you look into his works. Am I in contact with any historians from the serious ones? Yes. There is Mustafa Hashim Altan. There we go. There's a picture of him from his youth. There we go. And I'm in contact with him. I met him. I have interviewed him. There's a 3-part interview on the Cezire Derneği YouTube channel. If you just search Cezire Derneği, and he goes through the history of Turkish Cypriots, and he does an amazing job. He can speak Ottoman Turkish. He can speak Arabic. He can speak English. He can speak German. He was the founder of the Korinya archives.
Wow.
And for many decades, he was actually the head of the Korinya archives as well. So a serious Ottoman historian, yes, absolutely. And he's very well informed about Islam as well. And why that's important is because to understand the mindset of our people who were a highly religious community up until the early 20th century. Their culture, their mindset, their way of thinking, their outlook on life, their outlook upon each other was dominated by Islam. And if you don't have the basic knowledges of Islam, is particularly that of Tasawwuf, Sufism, and Tariqah, then you will not understand the mindset of the past and the development of Sufi orders as well. What we may understand today may be very different from what the Turkish Cypriots had understood from 100, 200, 300, 400 years ago. So Mustafa Hashim Altan, amazing scholar. He's still around. Anyone serious, any historians out there, do get in contact with him. He's happy to help. You know, there's this passion there. Other historians, there is this new generation of historians, which I admire and I respect to a point. However, there is a deficiency, and I don't mean that to disregard their work. I don't mean that to disrespect them either. And I won't mention them by name because there may be a misunderstanding, and I would hate for them to think that I'm being offensive to these people. That's not my intention. They're putting time and effort into the Turkish Cypriot community and adding value to that. However, these new ones are often affiliated with political movements. Naturally, that will lead to a bias. They cannot speak Ottoman Turkish. They are looking at second-hand sources. They don't understand Tasawwuf. So there has been a number of movements which have been coming up. The most recent of those, to distance the Turkish Cypriots from Turkey and Anatolian Turks. There is this movement that is saying that we came from the Shii sect, which is common in Turkey, which is the Alevis. Right? Now, I'm not saying that there was no Alevis, or more traditionally what they were referred to as Qızılbaş. I'm not saying that they didn't come to Cyprus. They did. But so did the Mevlevis, who are Ahl Sunnah, who are Sunni Orthodox Islam, not from the Shia group. So were the Naqshbandi. So were the Rufai. The largest tariqah in Cyprus from the very beginning, because we have the founding of the Mevlevi Tekke in Lefkoşa, in Nicosia, from the very start, and it was expanded on and given much prominence, was the Mevlevis.
Definitely.
So if the largest tariqah, religious order, it belongs to Sunni Islam, and you have other religious orders from Sunni Islam as well, then why the focus on a small religious order from something which is not representative of this community? The Turkish Cypriots have Rufai, have Mevlevi, have Alevi, have Naqshbandi, have Hepsi, all of it. But the level that the Mevlevis were, they were the dominant ones. And Alevi was just one small piece of the puzzle. So I feel that there is maybe a political bias there, because they're trying to say that the Alevis, the Qızılbaş, were aligned to the Safavids and would rebel against the Ottomans. And therefore, this political movement, which is looking, or which is trying to go against the authorities or the status quo, is a result of our tradition as rebels and so on. And we drink alcohol and we're not practicing because we come from this heretic sect or whatever it may be. That's not true. That simply is not true. We need to give it a nuanced approach, in which the nationalists are saying that there was no Alevis in Cyprus, for example. That's wrong as well. I have Ottoman sources which say that there was various Alevis which were made sürgün. Can't remember the English name.
Exiled.
So exiled. They were exiled from Anatolia for being troublemakers. However, the Halk, the Alevi community, was not expelled to Cyprus. The leaders were, for holding what they call sapkın inançlar. Sapkın inançları yaymak için, deviated, for spreading deviated beliefs. That's the words of the record, not my own beliefs here. So without knowing Islam, the basic tenets of Islam, without knowing or having access to primary sources, you're going to have issues. You're going to have issues, honestly. And I can go through some of the way that I research as well.
That's going to be Mustafa. That's going to be my next question to you. So I'm going to go to Ertan now. Thank you for that insight. That was really good. Also, Hamza Berat says Ottoman Turkish and its literature is very rich indeed. So he agrees with you. I want to go to Ertan. What advice do you give those Turkish Cypriots who are researching into their identity, into their history? You know, people are really fascinated with DNA now. We've mentioned that. What kind of advice do you give? Because it's very limited, isn't it, Ertan? There's not a lot online to learn about who the Turkish Cypriots actually are.
Here's the thing. It's not actually limited. And as Cezire Derneği, we've actually been surprised to find that it's not as limited as one may think. But the unfortunate thing is that in this past generation, in the past decade or 2 decades, where there's been this rush to get all sources of knowledge onto the internet, and that's where people access knowledge from nowadays. They don't go to libraries to pick up books, hard copies. They don't do that anymore. People have become very lazy with the internet. They go straight to the internet. They type into Google whatever Google presents them. That's what comes up. That's what they take in. And my first word of advice would be to break out of that mold. If you want to, I hear a lot of Turkish Cypriots saying, I want to know more about my past. I don't believe you when you say that, unless you are actually putting in the effort. If you're not putting in the effort, then you don't really want to know about your past, right? Typing into Google or watching a YouTube video or passively sitting there and waiting for information to come to you from whichever direction, you are not going to become aware of your past and your history by doing this. You need to become more assertive. You need to get off your bum, right? And you need to, first of all, I don't know, me and Mustafa, for example, we started off by going to the British Library. How old were we? We must have been 20, 21 years old when everyone else our age was pubbing and clubbing. Mustafa and I were heading down to the British Library. We were taking out books, most of them, albeit Orientalist books, but we were reading. And our first exposure actually to research about Turkish Cypriots was through the Orientalist sources. But us being Turkish Cypriots, we were reading these sources with a pinch of salt, because we knew that there was a lot more to it than what was being made available to us. And that didn't satisfy our hunger for knowledge. So we started looking outwards. We started finding scholars such as Halid Fedai, who I had the pleasure of meeting him about a year before he passed away. We actually traveled. We went to Cyprus. We went to Turkey. We found original sources. My Turkish wasn't so good, for example, when we were starting out. I could barely form a sentence. I worked on my Turkish. I improved my Turkish. I lived in Turkey for a number of years, and just doing that, I improved my Turkish. I'm not saying that everyone has to do that, but if you find that there's something limiting you from gaining knowledge, if you're serious about gaining that knowledge, you need to work on it, right? And just never be satisfied. I mean, we're always learning. No one gets to a point where they say, okay, I've learned enough now, stop, enough, I don't need to learn anymore, right? We could be 60, 70, 80 years old, we're still learning, right? But the important thing is that when you learn something, always be humble enough to say that there's so much more I need to learn, and seek out every single opportunity to learn whatever you can. Cezire Derneği actually aims to make it easy for you. Now, when Mustafa and I started off, we didn't have the luxury of having Cezire Derneği because there was no organization like Cezire Derneği before we started. So we had to do everything from scratch. And one of the aims of our dernek is actually to take this knowledge, which is out there somewhere in the cosmos, and bringing it onto the internet, bringing it onto a platform where regular people can have access to it and can learn bite-sized bits of information. So we're actually doing that for you. We're doing a lot of the hard work for you. So if you are serious about learning Turkish Cypriot history from a balanced point of view, from a balanced perspective, without political bias or anything like that, then follow our work. We have a Facebook page. We're not so active on Twitter, but we have an Instagram page. And every time, we have these little bits of information. And we're very accessible people as well. If you write us an email, write us a message on Twitter or Facebook, wherever it may be, and we will respond. So yeah, I mean, that's what I'd say. Just read and have a thirst for knowledge, and be proactive about it. That's what I'd say.
Amazing. Thank you, Ertan. Yeah, and the British Library, definitely, if anyone interested in learning about Turkish Cypriot culture or Turkish culture, lots of information at the British Library. There's reading rooms there. There's a creator of Turkish there. The library's closed at the moment, I'm afraid, but should open back at the end of July. That's the email I received. I just want to say, Okcan Yıldırım Türk says, I totally agree with you. I figured it out. Who is that historian? Let's not name it. Yes. Who says the Turkish Cypriots are always in mass? It's just, oh, sorry. Who always says Turkish Cypriots are Alevis in mass? It's just a political manipulation. I think also our viewers have to understand that even if there was, and there was, of course there was, because Mustafa, and we've seen Ottoman documents of different kind of groups, not just Alevis, but there was also Greek people that were sent to Cyprus to live, and Armenians and other groups. The political movement of Alevi today and that of the 15th or 16th century is completely different. So we're talking about proper Turkish. Most Alevis were of Turkish origin. They're Turkmen tribes, most of them, and they're probably the ones that were settled on the island as well. Also, before we go on to back to Mustafa, there was something that so yesterday on Sim TV, if anybody was watching Sim TV, now there's been some agreements made between the South and the North about video footage of archives of Turkish Cypriot of culture. So yesterday, the Greek Cypriot Cyprus Broadcasting Association has given like 5 hours of film reel to the Turkish side. I don't think my friends here watched it, but Sim TV did show lots of footage of this yesterday. Now, what upset me a little bit was they watched this footage and they then automatically said, this is how all the Turkish Cypriots were in 1963. So the footage was of children's holiday, the children's 21 Mayıs, sorry, Nisan. Nisan. So it was a children's holiday in Lefkoşa, and it was showing mostly Lefkoşa people celebrating the holiday, and it showed some remarkable footage of our leaders at the time, lots and lots of Turkish flags, the Turkish army that was stationed in the island, of course. And then the speaker or the presenter of the show said, you see, Turkish Cypriots were very, very modernized, they were very, very westernized, and now we have what we have now. But it'd be nice if they had some footage of village life and rural life, which was very, very different to the city life. So that's another thing. You can't just watch a film and then judge a whole community on what you've seen on a film reel. Outside of Lefkoşa, life was very, very difficult for the majority of Turkish Cypriots and even Greek Cypriots in the 60s. It was very poor, and people did live a very peasantry life still up until the late 60s. So I just want to say that you just can't judge a book by its cover, guys. And if you do get
very quickly. Can I just interject very quickly?
Yes, of course.
Linking what you've just said with the question that Levent asked earlier. We have to keep in mind that nowadays, with all the technology and modernized transport systems that we have, Cyprus, the villages and cities in Cyprus are very interlinked. It's very normal for someone from, I don't know, from one end of Karpas to get married to someone from Lefke. They meet somewhere and they get on and it happens. But we're not going back too far. Back to the 60s, it was very uncommon from someone from my dad's village, for example, to get married to someone he was from Çatalca, to get married to someone from Galeburnu. Because yeah, these people they didn't have any chance to actually meet each other because they weren't traveling. What happened was, especially in Mesaria, you had certain villages. They formed alliances with 2 or 3 villages nearby, and they formed little clusters, and they intermarried between those villages. So, for example, Kypros was getting along very well with like Gurnech and Ergenekon and these villages. So that was a cluster right there. And in ancient times, it was even worse. You know, it was even difficult to get from one village to another, right? So we have to keep in mind that ethnically speaking, when we say Turkish Cypriots as well, Turkish Cypriot is a blanket terminology, right? But every village has its own genetic makeup.
Absolutely.
We're all Turkish one way or another, but you might find in one village that the Italian proportion of DNA is higher. In another village, you may find the Arab or African proportion is higher. And that's why we have Turkish Cypriots still today in certain regions have maintained certain features of certain geographical regions. And it's only really with this generation that people are able to get out of the village and they're starting to travel and go to the city a lot more and meeting different people from different sides of the islands. It's only now actually that we are starting to really come together and form a more, like ethnically speaking, a more united identity. But really, like the Turkish Cypriot identity, it's more of a cultural identity rather than an ethnicity at the moment. So you'll find that it's the same thing with like certain customs, cultural customs. City life was a lot different to village life. Life in Kypros was a lot different to life in Paphos, for example. So when we say Turkish Cypriots, we need to think in terms of on plural lines, along plural lines. And it's only really now that we're starting to get some level of hegemony within the Turkish Cypriot community.
I really like that answer, and I totally agree. Yeah, you do see in some areas of Cyprus, just like Ertan said, so people from Chatos had good relationships with the surrounding villages like Gurnech and maybe Yennara, which is Nergisli. So there was intermarriage in the areas, but it was still in the area. So you had people like in Vadili who had relationships with people in, let's say, Beyarmudu, because it was in the area, and like Kaleburnu would be probably married off to someone in Kurova or Avtepe, but not really further out. That's quite. Can I just ask one very quick question? Has there been a point in our history, in our late history, like since the 1950s, there's been some sort of maybe people don't want us, maybe the elite did not want us to really know our history for some reason? Can you say that?
Yes. Obviously, I'm limited in what I can say without it being, because it's a politically filled question. So therefore, the way that I answer it needs to be limited in a public sphere so that it may not be misinterpreted. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, from the early 20th century, from the 1571, from when we came up until the early 20th century, we were known as Kıbrıs Müslüman. Muslim Cypriots. That was our primary identifier. And because of the nationalism which we took on, and often we translate secular nationalism. However, the type of secularism that we have taken on is not the type of secularism in the UK or in the US or Germany, for that matter. We have taken on a very a staunch secularist state, which is laicism. That's why in Turkish we say laik, which is very similar on the French model to the French, absolutely. And in fact, laik is from laicism, the word laicism. And as a result, we started to push our national identity forward, and we were known as Turks of Cyprus, Turkish Cypriots, Cypriot Turks. Now, again, I need to point out here, this doesn't mean that we weren't Turks prior to that. We were still Turks because our records say that we were Turkmen. And Turkmen, there's various theories as to what it means. Some say that it means Turk Iman, as in Turks that had become Muslim, had faith, Turk Iman. I forgot what the other one is now, but the word Turk is in there, and it was written in our records as well. So we knew that we was Turkish, but that wasn't important for us. We were Muslim. How we lived our life defined our identity as opposed to what we happened to be born into. In this nationalist era, however, other than symbolic signs of Islam, which because of the way that the Turkishness developed for 1,000 years, in which there's no way of getting out of Islam really, as secular as you want to be, minarets started popping up in all the mosques which didn't have minarets, for example, because a minaret signified that there was Muslims there. Therefore, there was a Turkish village.
Interesting.
And if I was to ask any of you here, who were the first leader of the Turkish Cypriot community? Some would say Rauf Denktaş, some would say Fazıl Küçük. Yeah. Allah rahmet eylesin. Allah rahmet eylesin. But in 1918, there was an independent meeting of the Turkish elite of the island. The meeting was called Meclis-i Milli, which was in 1918, which is national conference or national meeting. And they elected, I'll show you his picture because he's someone I admire greatly. And when you see how he looks like, you'll understand what I mean, because it opposes the nationalist narrative. Is that clear?
Yeah.
A man with a beard and a turban and a jubbeh. His name is Hacı Hafiz, and Hacı means he went to Hajj, and Hafiz means that he learned the whole of the Quran
memorized
by heart. Yeah. And he was a mufti, which means he has the qualification and the authority, and is the leader of the Turkish Cypriot community spiritually, where he can give fatwa, he can give religious verdicts. But in 1918, in the Meclis-i Milli, he was elected not just as the religious and spiritual head, but he was elected as Reis-i Millet, the head of the nation. So he was the political and the religious leader. Hacı Hafiz Ziai Efendi, please take a note of this name. He is our first elected leader by democratic means, but we never hear of him. There is only a rusty sign in Old Lefkosh, in Old Nicosia, with his name on it. With his name on it. Now, either if we are proud to be Turkish Cypriot, honestly, then we need to accept all of our heritage. We come from a Muslim civilization, and religious leaders played a major part in our history. If you don't follow Islam, that's your personal choice. But this is the fact of the matter. So, in answering your question, yes, absolutely. The idea of what it means to be Turkish Cypriot by left wing, by right wing, has been misrepresented. We don't want to be right. We don't want to be left. We don't want to be extreme. We just want to represent what and how things were.
You know what? This has been an amazing show. It's been an eye-opener, very educational. I do have actually more questions, but we're going to have to leave it there, guys, and we're going to have to call you back maybe next week if you'd like to come back for a second part, because I've got lots of questions about our heritage. From how do you research? Where do you get your sources of research? Are there Ottoman archives with our family or our cultural history? People are inboxing me privately. Can you explain the term Linobambagi and did it exist? So there's loads of stuff that we can cover next week. Would you come on next week and do the second part of the show?
I would love to. And my suggestion for our respected viewers, please inbox Hussein Abi. You can get hold of me. I'm on Facebook, or you want to message our organization, Cezire Derneği @gmail.com. Send your questions. I have primary sources here, guys. I have loads like just laid here ready for you. So I would love to come back next week and discuss, however controversial it may be, in a non-biased way, hopefully. So yeah, thank you for having me, and thank you for our guests for tuning in.
Thank you, Ertan, and thank you, Mustafa. And for our viewers, if you're viewing this evening, please make a note that in about 5 minutes time, hopefully if they're not running late, TCC UK, in partnership with Eurogames TV and TCCA and somebody else as well, are going to have their second part of the quiz tonight, and Mustafa's going to be a special guest there. So that's why we're going to cut the program short today. Be back next week again with our friends from Cezire Association. Let's talk about our history. Let's talk about next week about what happened in 1571. Where did our ancestors come from? Were they just from Anatolia? Why did they come to Cyprus? What happened to them? How did they live alongside with their Catholic and Orthodox compatriots on the island? These are all things that we're going to learn from Cezire Association. Thanks for being on the show, everyone, and have a blessed Friday tomorrow, and look forward to seeing you all next week. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.